here's what I think is very interesting. The recruiting process of Eileen Gu is very strategic, and it almost mirrors a spy operation. This is a video showing when the Chinese Communist Party first approached Eileen Gu and her mom. I think when a lot of people picture how the Chinese Communist Party go about their influence operations, they rarely picture what really happens. One of the first things I noticed after moving to the West is how differently people view sports. In an authoritarian regime, sports are something very different. They are often tied to deep identity related feelings. They're tied to national pride. They're tied to national shame. And even political legitimacy. When I was growing up in China, people rarely talk about sports for the sake of talking about sports. It's never about the techniques, about the specific sports in discussion. It's always about proof of something bigger. Look how great China is, look how strong we are, how many gold medals we won. It's always a symbol for something else. It's a mindset that was kind of forced on us, and that's how we were taught to think about sports. That is why the Chinese government is so obsessed with Eileen Gu, and they're willing to spend millions of dollars backing athletes like her. Welcome to my channel. My name is Lu. I was born and raised in authoritarian China. Today we're going to talk about Eileen Gu. Let me give you a sense of how serious this is. According to documents released by the Beijing Sports Bureau, documents that were later removed but reported on by outlets like the Wall Street Journal, roughly $6.5 million was allocated for Eileen Gu's training support in 2023 alone. Then, in a later budget document connected to preparations for the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan, another $6.6 million appeared as training support to Gu and another US-born Chinese athlete. To understand how unusual it is, you have to compare it to the rest of the sports world. The annual salary of a top international ski coach typically ranges from $100,000 to $300,000. That means the funding at this scale could support an enormous team, coaches, physiotherapists, training facilities, and advanced sports science programs. I mean, she literally had money to hire 20 top coaches in the world. So this is not really normal. This is the amount of money that most professional athletes could never dream of in their entire career. It is truly not even an exaggeration to say that China is backing Eileen Gu, and this really unequivocally contributed to her success. Which raises the obvious question, why? This is actually a strategy that goes back to the 1950s. After the Chinese Communist Party took power in 1949, they began investing heavily in elite sports. The goal was never about public health. It was about winning medals. A Chinese term that is roughly translated to whole nation system is familiar to a lot of Chinese citizens. That basically means concentrating national resources to produce a small number of elite champions. Now, this model obviously wasn't originally invented by the Chinese Communist Party. It was actually borrowed from the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union and other communist states treated sports as a geopolitical competition. Winning a medal on a world stage was a way to prove that your political system was superior. At least that's how they think. China inherited that model, but in my opinion, they also expanded on this model. China has openly acknowledged this strategy to its people. I mean, as someone who was born and raised in China, I remember growing up hearing this term at school, and I believe everybody who grew up in China has heard of the term ping pong 外交 or ping pong diplomacy. In the textbook that we used, ping pong diplomacy was something that the Chinese Communist Party was really proud of. They call it turning a small ball, the ping pong, into a bigger ball. They were able to use this as a bridge to rebuild the diplomatic relationship with the US. And they really kind of pat themselves on the back in the textbook and say that this is a really smart move by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, this brings us back to Eileen Gu. She is perfect for all the reasons that I've listed above. She was born in the US, she speaks fluent English, she is very marketable, and she is the best tool for the Chinese Communist Party to prove their political legitimacy, especially among Gen Z and younger generation. But here's what I think is very interesting. The recruiting process of Eileen Gu is very strategic, and it almost mirrors a spy operation. They identified the target, they cultivate the relations with the family, with her mother, and opportunities are presented by the Chinese Communist Party. This is a video showing when the Chinese Communist Party first approached Eileen Gu and her mom. Among all the, Chinese officials who approached the family, there were reporters from Xinhua News Agency. I think when a lot of people picture how the Chinese Communist Party go about their influence operations, they rarely picture what really happens. It's very smooth. It's not something that you would expect, right? In this venue, it's people just, having food and chatting with their acquaintances. The Chinese state often begins through seemingly benign cultural or media organizations, journalists, cultural exchanges, state-linked institutions. These are very common entry points for them, which is why footage showing Gu being approached and her mom being approached by a Xinhua journalist in early years is very interesting. Because Xinhua is not just a news agency, right? It is also a central arm of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda system. And historically, journalism has often served as a convenient cover within Chinese intelligence operations. So when we see these kind of early interactions, it suggests that this process may have been much more deliberate than people assume. You can get away with a lot. If you claim that you're a journalist, you can travel abroad, nobody would bat an eye on you, nobody would doubt what you are doing here. I do want to note that the case of Eileen Gu is truly an exception for athletes in China. Most athletes inside authoritarian sports systems do not grow up with her level of freedom or privilege. When I read that Eileen Gu and Elisa Liu were able to have a separate life that not completely evolves around sports, I was very shocked, because growing up, I always thought, athletes all around the world grew up the same way that the Chinese athletes did, and that is pretty inhumane. You go through insufferable training process, you are not treated very nicely. They're often recruited at a very young age, and they were robbed of a normal childhood. They cannot go to a normal school, and once their competitive careers end, many of them are just left without strong support systems. So growing up, I heard sad stories about how these retired medalists are kind of like used products, just abandoned by the system and completely went broke, didn't have anything from the country that they literally sacrificed their life to fight for. And I always try to bring the real people to a geopolitical issue, because I think it's easy to sit around and talk about these high-end conflicts, and it's easy to forget that at the end of the day, this elite sports model really benefit very few people, and it's the thousands of ordinary athletes that are paying the price, and it's really sad, and they shouldn't pay the price for all of this. All right, that's all for now, and as always, remember to like, share, and comment. I'll see you in the next one.